it's an opportunity for investors because of the potential solutions it can really provide. And I mean, we're just talking about not one small product section, because construction is an enormous sector that we can really benefit. But it's absolutely, Mandy. We've done a lot of R&D work. We've already got products to market around hemp plastics, around green hydrogen production, bioethanol production. These are all very, very viable end uses for the crop. They all need large capital investment.
Hey guys, it's Mandi with Global Hemp Association. I wanted to say thank you so much for joining. I'm excited about the opportunity to build a relationship and connect this supply chain. I mean, after all, that's why we started the association. Our association was built on the foundation of connecting supply chain, building relationships, and helping you grow your business. Anyone from farmers, manufacturers, and distributors, people that are passionate about the supply chain, and those creating products selling into biofuels, plastics, textiles, construction, and building materials. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. If you're listening now, please chime in. Let us know where you're coming from or where you're listening in from. We'd love to say hello. And take a minute real quick and subscribe to our YouTube channel, like the comments. If at any point you hear something that you like within our show or have seen something you like, please forward it and share it. We're really close on YouTube to being able to monetize and actually do something with some of our content. And so we're really pushing to get to 1,000 viewers or 1,000 subscribers. So please go subscribe. And then, of course, the best thing is hit the little bell so that on LinkedIn, so that it'll remind you when we're on live again. But I'm excited. We've got lots of things that are going on here at GHA. And after NOCO, we've taken a real opportunity, Kayla, Joanne, and I, and our team, to evaluate what needs are and opportunities are. And I could spend all hour talking about some of the new stuff we have going. But ironically enough, Jamie, I don't know you very well. And so I'm really excited about this hour to hear from you and what you have going on. So I'd love to just turn it over and dive into who you are and what are you doing now? But before even what we're doing now, what got you into this industry?
Certainly, Mandy, and thanks very much for having me. My name's Jamie Bartley. I'm the CEO of the Unite Group. We're quite a diverse group of companies, but I'll go through the companies shortly. What really got me into the industry, I've always sort of had a fairly close connection with the agricultural sector, and I've actually spent 15 years working in waste management and specified and sort of did quite a lot of specialist work around contaminated land remediation. And that was actually my initial touch point with hemp. About 7 or 8 years ago, I started looking at a couple of research papers around how we can use hemp as a sustainable tool to clean up contaminated land, phytoremediation for its POS term. And I think as soon as I started looking at it, I thought, wow, this crop can actually do so much more than just clean up some contaminated land sustainably. And I really started deep diving into sort of research that was already in place around the various aspects and benefits that the crop can have. And I suppose I could see to a certain degree the stars aligning between the public global perception of things like microplastics and decarbonisation and food security and energy production. And I could absolutely just see that it was hemp's ultimate time to become a solution again. And I mean, for thousands of years, as humanity has used it as a solution. We're unfortunate to live in the 100-year blip of prohibition where it's not been quite looked on in the same manner. But I think we're coming out the back of that now because ultimately the need is there from so many different sectors. So that was really sort of my initial journey with hemp, and I've quite quickly realised there was a lot of talk and not a lot of action around hemp, both in the UK and internationally. And obviously some of that was prevented by the legislation that was around hemp and cannabis cultivation and different restrictions. But we formed the Unite Group at the back end of 2018, and that was really all around focusing on improvement of both human life and planetary life. And we see hemp and cannabis as a massive part of that. So within the Unite Group, we've got a few different businesses. We've got Unite Waste, which is our previous business, specialises in contaminated land and waste management from industrial and construction sectors, and we're very much focused on circular reuse of those materials that treat everything as a resource, not as a waste, and look at trying to minimise the actual disposal of any elements and reduce the virgin imported materials. And then we've got Unite Energy, which we work in the retrofit energy efficiency sector in the UK. So we have contracts with large energy providers funding contracts, and then we deliver retrofit energy efficiency measures into those existing properties. And we also have a retrofit business as well, Unite Retrofit, which again holds various accreditation that allows us to install those energy efficiency measures. And it also gives us a route to market for the hemp insulation products and the hempcrete blocks that we're looking to scale across the UK production-wise. So it's quite a nice synergistic fit there, where we've got a direct route to market through our other businesses to deploy a lot of the products that we're going to be manufacturing at scale. We've also got Unite Medical, which is a medical cannabis business, and Unite Invest, which is FCA brokers. That's a finance broker, which enables us to offer finance to consumers or farmers for equipment, etc. So, and then Unite Hemp, which is obviously the main focus of the conversation today. We're the largest UK licence holders for industrial hemp cultivation. We've got 1,700 acres licence, and we've undertaken 3 years of growing 240 acres for research. So we've invested over £1 million in self-generated revenue across the group into research and development around hemp cultivation. We've grown 5 cultivars at 11 seed densities and really tried to drill down into as much yield data and how the variables of seed densities and soil compositions affect the actual yield of the fibre, the shiv, the cannabinoids, the seeds. So we know that when we go to scale to 15,000 acres per facility, we know exactly how much products within reason. It's an agricultural crop, let's not forget that, but within reason, we've got a very robust commercial model and operational model around those facilities.
Okay, I've got lots of questions. I tried to keep
hopefully that gives you a brief enough overview.
I have lots of things I want to chat with. And so again, I'm going to remind everybody, if you guys are on, leave a note. Feel free to ask questions throughout this. You've got lots of experience, Jamie, so it's great. Retrofit energy, or for energy. Talk to me about your blocks that you mentioned.
Yeah, so we're working to scale hempcrete production in the UK into blocks, which allows it, and doing it at the right scale allows it to go into both mainstream new build, but also the retrofit market. So in the UK, there's around 24.5 million homes that need retrofit energy efficiency measures to achieve the net 2050 climate targets. And to do that, obviously we need scale production of insulation, for instance. But the insulation products alternatives, as Mark from HempFacts was discussing recently with you, the embodied energy in the alternatives like glass fibre or rock wool are huge compared to the negative carbon that's associated with cultivation of hemp fibre. So then when you lock up the carbon that's in the hemp fibre, it's about 1.67 kilograms of embodied carbon per kilogram of hemp fibre. When you lock that up into retrofit of a building using insulation, you're not only locking that carbon up out of the carbon cycle to the lifespan of the building, but you're also reducing the operational carbon requirements or energy requirements from that building too. So you have a double net effect on removing carbon from the atmosphere. So that's one benefit. But the ability of utilising hemp products to do that, and the blocks specifically, if we look at sustainable wood fibre insulation as an alternative, that's what the government in the UK are currently pushing for. If we did just 10% of the UK's annual insulation usage using sustainable wood fibre from UK forests, we have to cut down 50% of the UK forests in the first year. If we do another 10% of the annual insulation usage, we've cut down the other 50% of the UK forests. We've got to wait 28 years for that biomass volume to grow again. Whereas hemp will produce 4 times the biomass that forestry will in a 4-month growth cycle. You can grow it in the crop rotation in the UK, and we've got 4.7 million arable acres of land in the UK, so it's absolutely scalable. We only need to grow 150,000 acres of hemp to grow the 10% of the UK's annual insulation, which is our current plan for our bioconstruct model that we're currently funding. But equally, if we really wanted to go to 100%, we've got 1.5 million arable acres of land there that potentially could be in a crop rotation. And then when you look at the layered benefits to improving food security by following crop yields of wheat increasing by 16 to 18%, reduction in soil compaction, improved attenuation capacity, biodiversity net gain, all of those layered benefits then from an agricultural perspective, and you're localizing the economy on a decentralized basis, so you're not hauling raw materials all over the place too. So that's really our model around trying to utilize hemp in retrofit, because it's such a sector that's got a large growth potential. the government in the UK spending £2 billion a year just in one part of the retrofit sector, and there's going to be further spend. So it's certainly a well-funded sector because they know the impact it can have on ultimately decarbonising the whole economy as such.
Okay, so we hear all the time, right? It's hard to scale this because dollar for dollar, it's been more expensive. We're looking at insulation made with fiberglass or plastics or whatever, and then hemp, right? Hemp is not as when you put it right next to each other, right? Hemp is more expensive. When you're having the conversations, and especially being on the investment side also, what are you seeing coming on the investment side to take into consideration the double decarbonization opportunity that we have in, sequestering, what they're sequestering, avoiding, and whatever other piece, right?
I mean, I think from an investment point of view, to a certain degree, yes, the investment's needed into infrastructure. That's the big barrier of any.
But are they coming in, right? Are they coming in? Yeah. What is investment looking at?
I think. Well, we're seeking investment at the moment, so I'm trying to understand that in as much detail as possible.
Yeah.
What I would say is that the legislation will drive some of the investment too. So, from a UK perspective, there's legislation coming in that means that developers have to account for the embodied and the operational carbon of buildings. Suddenly, then, when you're looking at both of those metrics, that really cements hemp as a very, very viable product because of the reasons I touched on a minute ago. So that legislation will actually then force the investment to come in because the developers will have to have those alternate products available to them. And that's when suddenly your glass fiber or your alternate products in the market become less financially viable to a developer because of the implications they have on their overall development accounting for carbon and greenhouse gas emissions.
That's crazy. Shane just asked again, just to clarify, that 10% of the current need for the 2050 standard would wipe out 50% of the UK forest.
Yeah, so I'll just go for, certainly, Shane, pretty much. So if we were to go with what the UK government is currently suggesting we do for a sustainable source of insulation, which is they suggest we use wood fibre insulation. If we were to base that just on UK forestry, because obviously we're trying to remove the need to cut down forestry globally to supply chains after COP26. So, and we've signed up to that, and we led that as the UK government. So let's say we've got to then look at UK supplied wood fibre. Yes, 10% of the UK's annual insulation, just 1 year's insulation, would be 50% of the UK's forests. Yeah.
Well, and that just goes to show, even if it is pulled from another forest, the fact that impacts, it would impact us that much, and that hemp is a solution, right? Hemp is a resource. And so
absolutely. I mean, and again, when you look at it compared to in UK perspective, oilseed rape is the general crop that's in a crop rotation, if you call it the third crop, if you like, in a rotation, a break crop, and hemp works very well in a crop rotation in the UK in placement of oilseed rape. Oilseed rape gets attacked by flea beetle very badly, and since one of the pesticides, neonicotine, was banned in Europe and the UK a few years ago, that's had a massive impact. So if we replace oilseed rape with hemp in the UK, not only can we take all the products you get from oilseed rape, actually at a far higher yield, you get a massive higher impact in carbon sequestration, but also hemp's the only oilseed crop that increases biodiversity that we can grow in the UK. So it increases the biodiversity as well. It's a great late season source of pollen for our pollinators, for bee populations. So again, it's all these layered benefits that actually then improve our food productivity and crop productivity across the other crops as well.
Yeah, exactly. Nathan, hi, welcome for joining. He said, well, cutting down that many forests or that much forest doesn't seem very sustainable at all. I feel like that's a quote probably from our Thorax or our Dr. Seuss book. And hi, Saba, it's good to see you today. You're right. I think it's a complete opportunity on the building side. Okay, so.
And I mean, just to Saba's point there around opportunity, it's an opportunity for investors because of the potential solutions it can really provide. And I mean, we're just talking about not one small product section, because construction is an enormous sector that
But
we
it's
can really
one
benefit. But it's what, yeah, absolutely, Mandy. We've done a lot of R&D work. We've already got products to market around hemp plastics, around green hydrogen production, bioethanol production. These are all very, very viable end uses for the crop. They all need large capital investment into the infrastructure to allow it to scale at the right commercially viable point.
Okay, so going back to the kind of the question I didn't ask very well before, but on the investment side, right? Are you starting to see a shift? And I guess this goes out to everyone, right? Are we really starting to see a shift where investment capital is starting to look at the whole picture of the power of sustainability that's attached to hemp?
I think there is, there's a lot more ESG focus from investments and from high street banks. I mean, there's a lot of ESG funds that are really sort of being put together now to focus on where they can have that impact investment. So I think they are really turning the corner and starting to look at green tech and agri-tech type solutions. I mean, ultimately, we need solutions from lots of different sectors to achieve the impact we need to on climate crises and greenhouse gas emissions. But I do think that the focus on what agriculture can give, and I mean, Kiss is sort of this great example of how much impact we can just have from soil. I mean, we can literally solve our decarbonisation problems globally if we really focus on how we manage our soil, as well as reduce emissions and stop those type 1 and type 2 emissions, or group 1, group 2 emissions. But it's really about actually just managing the natural environmental and ecosystems we have and ensure that those are as optimized as possible. And again, we're very much advocates of regenerative farming systems and that living soil. Look at the microbial activity, look at the fungal activity, look at the protozoa. If we can get those right, suddenly then you're up to about 32 tonnes per hectare of carbon sequestered from hemp. And that, again, you start then taking that per hectare globally of the potential
32 tons.
Yeah, if you farm for a zero-till regenerative method with a very optimized living active soil, and equally you validate that those items I mentioned there, the protozoa, the microbial activity, and the fungal activity, if you validate those along with the organic carbon, the inorganic carbon within the soil, and the above ground biomass, the carbon that's sequestered into there, you're up to around 32 tonnes per hectare. I mean, at least 60% of it's in the soil that hemp sequesters, and only 40% of the carbon then remains in the above ground biomass.
Say what? Okay. I want to dive into this more. Like, I would love, this is a topic that carbon being attached to the hemp, that carbon footprint that hemp brings is very, very powerful in a conversation, but it's something that I think is still so misunderstood, right? So I don't know if you want to dive into it, I'd love to learn more. I'd love to understand who's certifying those credits. How do farmers get involved in that? Where do they go to find contracts on the carbon?
So, I mean, I think it's a very pertinent question because there's lots of, if you like, so-called validation bodies. There's some of the more well-known ones, but what I would say are probably more faux carbon credits have been traded on there, where it's been double, treble traded of credits, and it's not very transparent. So, I'm working with various different people who are developing ultimately solutions to do exactly what you just said there, Mandy. It's how do you validate and how do you find a market for those credits? So I think the more the validation and the more the third party validation that's done, and then transparency of data, so blockchain enabled data, so it can't then be changed and fudged, that will there drive the higher value of carbon credits. So some of the guys we're working with have basically put it's called the UK Soil Carbon Code, and it's really looking at how we actually accurately validate the soil carbon content. So look at the baseline. Then you've got practices, so that's around tillage practices, do you use organic fertilizers, compost teas, etc., moving away from your conventional chemical fertilizers and additives, and then also looking at what the attenuation capacity of that soil is, what the microbial, fungal, and microzoa activity is, and that's done through literally taking soil samples, looking at them through a microscope, and that way you can really then validate the activity of the carbon chain within those elements, you can send a soil sample to a lab which can accurately look at the organic and inorganic carbon content. And once you understand all of that, then you can start combining it with geospatial data, above ground biomass yield data. You can easily run a lab data on hemp straw. It's around 42% carbon generally, and then that relates to around 3 tons of atmospheric carbon dioxide when you have 42% of organic, organic carbon within the hemp biomass. So those are the sorts of levels of metrics that you need to be assessing to then really look at potentially 100, 150 pound a ton for carbon credit because of all that validation right the way down. But then if you start looking at, wow, if I do all of that validation and assessment of data, yes, there's a cost associated, but if I'm getting 100 pound a ton at 32 tons a hectare, wow, that soon starts
that's
really
game changing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's that really drives interest. What about though certifying? I understand there's a lot of question in certifying that credit, especially for those that are already doing regenerative practices, right? How are they getting paid? And then how do we secure long term, say that the complex credit ends up in a home, that home isn't destroyed or broken up or taken down in 3 years, and that credit is being traded then on a futures agreement? Like what does that look like, you think?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the way we're looking at that is that we're going to leave the soil carbon for the farmers, and we're going to take the above ground carbon into our products. So through blockchain enabled traceability, we'll go from the seeds where we drill in the soil, including any emissions for any pre-preparation works, if there is any small amount of tillage needed, or if there's none at all, ideally direct drill, but those emissions all get accounted for too. And then every emission will get accounted right the way through to the point of harvest of the biomass, and then again through the life cycle analysis of the product production. So through the decortication, through the non-woven insulation production or the hempcrete block production, all of the emissions get accounted for through those stages. What we do is our first facility's got a 10.5 megawatt renewable biomass power station on site. So we get the benefit of renewable power into the facility, power in the processing, which helps with the life cycle analysis. And then ultimately what you end up with is in your roll of insulation or in your block, there is X amount of carbon embodied that you can truly say is in there. Now that goes to, from our point of view, goes to the developer, goes to the end user, because they have to account for the carbon in their construction. So if they can value that all the way through accurately, they can confidently take that in there. And then in essence, that carbon then is locked up. There is variances around if there is capped fire of a building, all of those types of things. So the way the accounting systems that we're using of taking that into account is that 20% is always left over as a reserve. So whatever the 32 tons per hectare, say is a number, 20% of that will never get traded or utilised by the farm as a credit or utilised in the product as a credit. So you have in essence a risk buffer that allows for then those types of scenarios that potentially are out of your control, but could theoretically happen down the line, albeit are less likely to happen than the building having its operational lifespan of 30 years and then being deconstructed. We want to move longer term to panel systems that actually have, say, a 3 building lifespan use.
Right.
So you can deconstruct those panels from the building. Those go back onto, in essence, a database. They've got structural performance data that shows they're suitable for use in X, Y, or Z type of building or location. And then they can go back into a building without actually that traditional demolition, recycling type repurposing cycle that, again, emits a lot of carbon.
That's hard for me to fathom because even in my lifetime, I watched, say, trailers go from heavy duty, long lasting trailers to within the first time you use them, door panels are falling off and things are so poorly made. They're just made. Yeah. So it's interesting. And it's not just the construction industry, right? The auto industry is moving to the same business model where looking for, which again, just poses more opportunity for hemp, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I have to give a shout out really quick. There's lots of people chiming in with questions. Brian's got one, Sab, I see you're on, Daryl. If you guys are not subscribed, please go and subscribe to our YouTube channel and share it. We are really close to hitting some opportunities with YouTube. And so we're just really pushing out there for both watched hours. So I always tell people, not only are we on YouTube, but also on Anchor and Google Podcast as well. But go in and let them play, let these videos play. There's a lot of little nuggets in these that, like, I wasn't anticipating going down the carbon discussion as much. So I'm really excited about this. Brian, great question. Do you think hemp has a feedstock to slow paralysis would be a good way to make syngas, liquid biofuels, and biochar?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. We've done some research recently. Actually, we did a trial run with a pyrolysis unit over here. If you wanted to reach out afterwards, Brian, if you want to go into more detail, I'm happy to share the results with you. But certainly, from a source of char, it makes a very good char, and there's also potential for fibres if you char it at the right temperatures and pressures that you can actually produce very viable carbonised fibres. Again, as a replacement for carbon fibre, other than obviously the natural fibres that can be utilised in biocomposites. So I do think from a syngas perspective, yes. What I would say to that point as well, though, is having worked in the waste sector for a lot, there's actually probably probably more viable sources of waste streams that we could be focusing on for pyrolysis at the moment, and utilising the biomass feedstock from hemp to go into various different more viable net beneficial products with regards to decarbonisation. But I do think from a waste fraction type output, and also what we're looking to do as well is medical cannabis production facilities. Obviously, they have more biomass as waste in essence, which we'd see as a value. So I actually see pyrolysis units tagged onto medical production facilities to decarbonise their production and utilise the waste into there for the fuels, and then chars to go into agricultural land to lock up carbon as well. So I do think absolutely, I think there's a place for hemp and medical in biochar.
How do people reach you? If somebody wants to get in touch, how do they find you? I shared your website, but
yeah, so reach out through the website if you email the contact details. Likewise, my email address, anyone's welcome to email direct. It's Jamie, JAMIE @unite.co.uk, and also on LinkedIn as well. Feel free to connect me on LinkedIn.
Brian, thanks also for the question. Thanks for joining. Okay, so other questions. Tell me, what's your background? You're doing a lot of things. Like everything you're saying, there's topics I want to dive into more. Like I really want to get into some of the construction and building materials. Yeah.
It's quite diverse. I mean, I started off playing professional rugby when I smashed up my shoulder when I was 18, so that was the end of that. Then went into running pubs and restaurants for a couple of years. Then moved to France, lived out there in the Alps and ran ski resorts for a couple of years. And then moved back to the UK, got involved in construction, which is really my initial journey. And I think it was all around, for me, it's always been around the environment. I mean, I've got a passion for the environment. I love the mountains. I can see the impact global warming's having on the glaciers that I've been snowboarding on for years, that kind of thing. So I'm quite passionate about the impact. And again, I know the scale of, I suppose, I've never been put off by any scale. And for me, it's just variables and metrics. And as long as you're accurate at the front end, it doesn't matter what you scale to numbers. That's the back end, if you like. It's more about getting those front end bits right. And I could see that actually that we can do so much. We've just got to get on with doing it. There's a lot that sit there and go, we can do this, we can do that. Well, let's do it. And frustratingly, from my point of view, the only barrier I come up against every time is, okay, but we need X capital. And being a diverse group of businesses, we can only self-generate. As I mentioned, we spent a lot of money that we've generated profit for other businesses. But we now at the point we've got to really accelerate this. And to accelerate it needs the multi-million pound funds to then unlock the capital in the infrastructure. I mean, the likes of Jeff Whalen and Replanted, etc. That's great that those funds are starting to focus on industrial hemp, and I do like that there's a lot of focus, I suppose, from different sectors that initially probably didn't really look at industrial hemp as a solution, and now all going, whoa, actually look at the scale opportunity with it, because it really has got that scale potential globally, and especially on some of the sub-Saharan African projects that we're looking at. I mean, maybe if I just touch on one of those actually, which is
please.
Again, it's all about scale and impact and benefit for us. So we're working with a chap called Ken Dunn. He was awarded an OBE in the UK from the Queen Honors this year. Ken's great. Ken's got real passion about impact, and he works very closely in People's Republic of Lesotho, which is a sub-Saharan African country. It's one of the smallest countries in Africa. It's also one of the poorest countries in Africa. So very high poverty levels. And I mean, across sub-Saharan Africa, 1 in 3 people still, or globally, in fact, 1 in 3 people still cook over open wood fires. So they're standing there, and that's generally 7-8 hours a day over the wood fires, stirring pots, putting wood on the fire, breathing in the smoke. And the biggest killer of under 5-year-old children globally is smoke inhalation still, because they're strapped to the parents, the mothers generally, but strapped to the parents while they're breathing in this smoke. So what Ken's developed is basically, it's called an eco cook bag. And we've collaborated with Ken to make this so we can do it 100% out of hemp. So hemp fibre insulation, hemp materials, and a hemp cord for the rope, basically. And if you imagine a tea cozy, in essence, it's a big insulated bag that you put the pot inside. So you put the pot on the logs for about an hour, heat the pot up so it's at full temperature, put it in this bag, and then that's it. You can leave it, and it's equivalent for cooking for 8 hours.
Oh, wow.
But the impact that can then have on both human life. So the women get 7 hours a day back where they can go and use to further their knowledge, bring in income.
It's like an Instapot. It's like a crock pot that's
exactly that.
Awesome.
So each bag will provide 2,773 hours a year of lost time for women back that can spend it with their families, develop their own benefits for their own social impact, startup jobs, all sorts of different potential impact they can have with that time alone. And then the health benefit of not breathing in the smoke, the impact for the children not dying. And that's 2,773 hours worth of not burning timber per year per bag.
Right.
And we can do this from the waste straw from the licensed producers growing medical cannabis in South Africa and Lesotho. So those are the sorts of projects as well that we're very small scale, so small scale cultivation, so you can scale it across the 1.3 billion people that we could impact with it across Africa. But think of how much long-term impact and benefit those types of projects can have. And I think that's really about we want to have the impact on the large scale industrial processes, but we want to have that social impact on those projects that is really where our hearts are as well.
And we can do that. That's what's so cool. This right here is really what fuels my fire. Like, what keeps me going and keeps the grit in the game are people like you that connect the dots for me. Like, I had no idea what our supply chain looked like. I'm in Utah. I'm privileged. I live in Utah. I have had a good life and I'm lucky there, but I've been very disconnected about where my food comes, about how cost affects the people that are sewing and manufacturing our clothing. And hemp has brought that to light, and just a situation just like what you just talked about, and how hemp plays a role in a majorly impactful social scenario, as well as the economic development. And yeah, it's amazing. This is what I love about it. And it's cool. And this is where I would think that investment really is paying closer attention, right? But it still comes down to that dollar. And so being able to communicate all of these benefits that then become a better impact, right? How does it affect their dollar?
And that's it. And I think it's almost different investors. It's horses for courses. You've got investors that are going to be very interested in your scale production of construction materials and rolling that out at a large scale, and making profit at doing it. But I think there's probably a different subset of investors that are interested in the project, such as the eco cook bag in Lesotho, which actually can be a far lower value investment, but a far higher value of impact. Yeah. Because of the metrics needed. I mean, in an ideal world, yes, we go and spend 4 million, 5 million on a decortication facility, and then we can scale the production of the bags very quickly, so you can then really have that impact across a large population. But if not, you go and spend 12,000 on a small hand-fed decortication unit and enable the people to really start scaling it themselves.
Mm-hmm. My computer is about to die, and I don't know why. It's plugged in. So, welcome to my technology day. Hold on. I just saw my computer dim, and I lit up. It was like, oh, got it. Okay. I don't know what was wrong. Okay, so what do you think the US needs to scale? What are some of those needs that...
I think the missing link everywhere is decortication. It's large scale decortication, and it needs to be at the right scales. If you're doing sort of a ton an hour and things like that, you need to have a few of them, because I do think from all of the validation of different sort of models and scale models and projects that we're involved in, it only becomes viable, certainly for the mass use markets, if you get it done at the right scale. Otherwise, your price points on your fibre and your shiv don't allow it to then go into those sort of mass use markets like construction, etc. So I think it's about getting that scale point right for the primary processing, and decentralized as well. It's, if you're going to have mega factories or mega decorticators that are trying to service thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of hectares of hemp, you've got to haul that thousands of hectares of hemp massive distances on vehicles emitting loads of emissions and undoing all the carbon that you've just done. So it's got to be done on a decentralized basis, not on a mega factory basis, certainly for primary crop processing. And if I'm honest, my belief is you struggle to make it work on a mega factory basis, even on secondary processing. It's depending on which products you're going into, I would say, on that.
Okay. Back to carbon credits. Daryl has a really good question, and I was kind of curious also on scale. So after Daryl's question, I'd like to go back to what is that reasonable scale you think for acreage as well? Is there a concern with agricultural carbon credits getting a lower rating than industrial commercial credits?
I think any credit is down to the validation of that credit. So if you've got someone that's doing third party validation, if you could show you're working to an ISO methodology, if you've got a accredited laboratory, an ISO accredited laboratory undertaking your soil analytics, all of those types of things, I think actually add the price of a agricultural credit, if you like. And I think also as well is people sort of talk around carbon credits and just stop focusing on the carbon, but I actually see it as almost if we coin it, say a hemp credit, because you can have the carbon, but then you can have the biodiversity, you can have the sulfate removal. So there's actual value to all of those benefits, certainly from different markets that are emerging now, where actually if you can validate those aspects too and roll them all into one hemp eco credit, if you like, that then could have a really, really high value, because you've got those multiple layers in there for those different sort of tokenomics, so to speak. And I do think having it blockchain enabled is going to be quite key to the transparency and therefore the validity as well.
Are the majority of carbon credits being traded in private market versus on a talk to me how to
voluntary carbon markets, I think, is the main space that people are trading in, certainly hemp carbon credits at the moment. From a carbon emissions point of view, there is a UK government carbon emissions platform, but that is more geared towards industrial sellers and offsetting. It's not really about reduction. But I think as things move away from greenwashing and more around actually removal from all groups of emissions, I think again then that really cements those eco hemp credits with the biodiversity and the various other elements alongside the carbon.
Okay, so we talked about decortication as being a key thing, and I saw Shane just brought up a great comment about seeds, especially seeds in the U.S., right? When we look at scale, something, especially here, we focus so much on cannabinoid production. There's tons of feminized seeds available, tons of them. But what does that look like? And when I look at scalability, this need for scalable data and understanding what genetics are going where, what's your opinion there?
Yeah, absolutely. Seed is something that people do overlook when they start talking about scale. You need to have seed production. You need to have volumes of it. Ultimately, you can seed scalable, but it still needs someone doing it, and it can't just have everyone ringing up the suppliers or distributors going, we've got our facility online now and we want to do 10,000 acres, 5,000 acres this year, because they won't have it. You've got to talk almost 18 months in advance to your seed suppliers to ensure that they're replicating that current season to the volumes that you're then going to be ordering off them. So, I think it's about supply chain relationships. We work with quite a few of the European seed suppliers that do have scale availability, but we and they both know that as soon as we close the investment for the construction facilities, each of those circa 22 million in investment, each of those needs 15,000 acres a year of feedstock, and we're looking to do 10 of them around the UK and Ireland. So that again is all about making sure we've got the right level of seed available. But we're also working on, one of our partners is a global specialist in seed multiplication and crop breeding. So we're working with a partner to ensure that not just the seed is available for our needs, but also the rest of the sector's needs. I mean, I sit on the executive board of the Cannabis Industry Council in the UK and head up the hemp subgroup. So I work with a lot of the licensed producers and cultivators in the UK. And from our point of view, there's such a massive potential for the sector, and there's room for everyone in it. So it's all about collaborative working, data sharing, and trying to enable everyone to make a successful business within the sector, because that ultimately grows the whole sector and establishes it longer term for everyone.
Okay, so I don't know how to say this nicely, but being in Utah and not being in agriculture and not being as exposed to the global cannabis market as you have, I'm curious what more people like me may be missing, or what we should really be focusing on as we're looking to scale in the US, right? You said decortication, but like what are some key things we may not be, talking about?
I think probably harvest infrastructure as well. Dependent on, and this is again, it's down to end uses. I mean, ultimately, it's all about whole plant use. You've got to maximise every different component you can from that plant, whether it be biofuels, whether it be construction. But the more elements you can take off there, the better. So biomass, I mean, ideally it's a double cut combine. So you can take the seed, the biomass, separate those two fractions. You've got biomass for bulk extraction for cannabinoids. You've got, or terpenoids. You've got your seed there for obviously oil, protein powder. I think there'll be a big focus on hemp protein powder as people really try and move away from soy because of the deforestation impacts it has and the biodiversity impacts therefore. So then I think there'll be more of a drive towards hemp protein as well from a mainstream food producer's point of view. So I think that infrastructure needs planning. Ultimately, the guys that make the combines have to make the combines. They've only got a finite capacity for production of those combines. The farmers need to find the million odd euros to go and buy them. So that all needs factoring in too from a finance perspective. So I think it's about ensuring that the right infrastructure is in place before putting the crop in the ground. So that's got to be your decortication and your harvesting and your secondary infrastructure, because there's no point chasing off and decorticating a few thousand hectares of fibre and shiv, or fibre and herd, sorry. Yeah, I'm not sure to clarify that. For those who aren't aware, we call herd shiv in the UK, so I maybe should have started with that at the beginning in case anyone wasn't clear. But there's no point decorticating thousands and thousands of tons of fibre and shiv unless you've got secondary infrastructure available to put those into products, because someone's got to buy that. And that's really why we're looking at vertical integration of all our facilities. So you've got that guaranteed production capacity at the right size you need, availability that you need, and then you can go to your end users and promise X amount of supply contracts for this or that product. Because if you're going to start talking to big multinational house builders and the likes about scale production, you're going to be in pretty painful contracts if you don't supply them that product, because that's going to impact on them building all those houses that they want to build. So you've got to have that control, and that's something that I think you've either got to work in a very cooperative basis with supply chain partners for all of those elements that are all bought into this venture and really sort of reading from the same page, or you need to take the other view of getting the supply chain internally, but then you need the capital to deploy that infrastructure.
Well, and really when we look at scalability in big agriculture, that's what it is. They're controlling, and then they're developing equipment to hit the genetics so that it processes exactly or harvests exactly the way that they want.
Absolutely, yeah. We're doing a lot of work on genetics, which again, it's going to be a longer term one, but it's all about, in my mind, it's optimizing the genetics so you minimize your primary and secondary processing. So we optimize genetics. There's one that's been developed recently in the UK, which has got a very high oleic acid content in its hemp seed oil. And what that basically means is hemp seed oil is pretty unstable, if we're honest, normally. It oxygenates quite a bit, and therefore it's not always that viable for biodiesel production and biofuels. But if you've got high oleic acid content, that removes the oxidization, it removes the instability issues, and then you can make a very viable biodiesel from it. Also for mainstream food production, oleic acid is a constituent of mainstream food production that is quite beneficial and sought after. So, and that was done through 7 years of crossing genetics, breeding to develop a genetic that is specifically focused on that production. I see a lot of work around optimizing genetics so they've got a lesser lignin level. So then the cottonization phase of the treatment and process is far reduced, which reduces the energy requirements and costs to the cottonization. So I actually see some, not necessarily GMO and genetically modified, but just interbreeding traits of different cultivars to then benefit the specific end users that you're targeting those cultivars at. I mean, we've done, as I said at the beginning, we've done 5 cultivars at 11 seed densities. Seed density alone has a massive impact on how a crop will perform and its height. I mean, we've had the same cultivar, Santica 70, some of which would be about 2.2, 2.3 meters in one field, where we had quite a loose seed density, go up to 80 kilos per hectare of seed, and we were up pushing nearly 4 meters in the majority of the field. So those sorts of impacts can have a huge impact. And again, if you're chasing a primary focus on shear or fibre, those seed densities are going to impact on how much of each you get. So I think it's about understanding the genetics and optimizing them moving forward.
Yeah, yes. And it's frustrating. I think a lot of times to pop or burst the bubble when we talk about scale and people are getting excited and they want to come in and we're like, well, wait, we don't know what genetics are even going to grow, let alone scale there. And yeah, so it's quite the process. Bill, you've got a great question here. Energy retrofits use a blown in cellulose insulation, no bats to maximize performance. Are you or anyone making blown in cellulose insulation?
It's something that isn't, as far as I'm aware, isn't on the market currently commercially available. It is a product that we're looking at R&D at the moment with one of the universities that we work with closely. So we're looking at ultimately what fractions of the shiv need to be treated and how we can cost effectively treat those to make them fire resistant enough to then be blown into the cavities. So yeah, I think there is an option moving forwards with that. It's not something that's commercially and market readily available yet.
So that would be just like a spray hemp insulation when you say the cellulose insulation?
Yeah, so if you imagine sort of in essence, you've got cellulose fibre in the hemp shiv. It's a high cellulose fibre product. So it's getting it into the right fraction where you can blow it without it bridging, because if you imagine it getting blown into a cavity, the danger with blown cavity insulation is if it bridges at all, then you don't actually fill up the wall, you don't insulate it properly, you leave cold spaces, etc. So the key parameters of blown insulation, they use beads in essence, small beads normally, like a polystyrene bead, if you imagine that type of product. Because of that reason, it will blow, and if it does bridge at all, it basically will fall around itself and fill in the space so you get a full. But there has been a lot of problems with cavity insulation installed in the UK retrofit where it's now getting removed because of those problems with installations. So yes, I think it is a product that will come to market, but not one that we've currently got commercially available.
Okay, if I'm a processor, going out, and I know, we just talked about decortication facilities. What are some things that investors or people in the space should be paying attention to determine whether or not their equipment meets end use specs or will be a viable piece of equipment?
Yeah, so it's a very good question, Mandy. I mean, I'm actually just writing a spec at the moment for our end use specifications to then make sure that the primary processing infrastructure is going to give the spec that's required, because it is pretty specific. For instance, we take the hempcrete blocks. The hempcrete blocks need to be a specific specification of shiv. It doesn't need to have any dust in there. There's quite a few parameters, and if you don't achieve those with the shiv, then you're not going to be able to make the structural, or not the structural blocks, but the performance blocks that you need to, and therefore you defunct your end use product. Now that comes down to having the right either hammer mill or first bale openers initially, but then you've got your priming. So is it a hammer mill? Is it going to be a roller, set of rollers, for instance, on your primary decortication process? And then looking at, have you got the right amount of combs and step cleaners in place to give you the right cleanliness of fibre, depending on if you're going to go to a non-woven insulation, you probably need a slightly less percentage cleanliness of fibre compared to if you want to go to a higher value composite, for instance, product or a textile. So it is some of it's going to be about understanding your end uses before you specify your equipment, and then ensuring with your technology suppliers that they can achieve X, Y, and Z parameters on those components that you need to go into a secondary process, whatever that might be. So it is really understanding, and I suppose whenever we get involved in any new project, I always say we'll start at the end, because if we don't start at the end and work out exactly what product we want to go into, every time we change one of those products, we have to undo all the technologies and the volumes, and it basically have to redo the whole model. Whereas actually, if we start at the end, we can go, right, these are the products, therefore we know we need to achieve this specification. At that point, we need to achieve this specification at the post-decortication phase, and therefore the decortication needs to be this, and the throughput of draw needs to be this at this moisture content. Those are the sorts of scenarios, and even retting as well. If you've got an over-retted straw, that will have a negative impact on a hempcrete block, because the mould in there will interact with the lime binders. So it's those types of intricacies.
Well, we're doing exactly opposite of what we want when we're putting mold back in walls.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
so we got to be careful with this.
And likewise, even a sort of a fresher, a lesser retted straw, so a very bright, quite light straw, even that's problematic, because you've got too high a sugar content, which again will affect the sugar content is still in there, and you haven't had the natural microbial breakdown of the lignin and the semi-lignin. So all of those types of impacts feed into it as well. So I mean, as much as I do think it's a very robust crop, you still have to be quite specific with what you do with it, and that all comes down to having the right specifications of technologies, and you need to understand your end uses. If you change your end uses, you could find you can't achieve that with the specification equipment you've got in place.
Well, and I had just to speak to this when we talk about how broad the opportunity is and how narrow really the scope needs to be when we talk about specs or standards, right? And Andrew Bish, for example, with Bish equipment, he said when he came in and first started to develop all this different equipment, somebody would say, well, I'm looking for XYZ. Say I'm looking for a piece of equipment that cuts a crop that's 9 feet tall or 12 feet tall, and so he makes his equipment, drops his equipment down to cut to 6 feet tall, just in case it doesn't get that tall. Right. And then come to find out the crop didn't even get to 6 feet tall, and now you can't even use the equipment. And that's a perfect example of capital that's needed in this R&D phase, and that's one piece of it. That's one piece of harvesting equipment, and understanding, how impacted even the equipment is by, the harvest and the genetics and where it's grown and so forth. So I know that's very basic for a lot of us, and a lot of us that are listening, it's not. It's amazing to me, even in the cannabis space, when I start to talk about the opportunities about building materials and biocomposites and plastics and proteins and sugars and all of the goods. And you hear people, that are in the space say, wait, what? You can do what with this crop? And so I'm excited. What is it, for those of you that are listening, we have a couple of minutes left, but out to our audience, Jamie, how do we support you? What is it you're looking for that someone in our audience may have a connection or be able to connect you to?
I mean, certainly we're very open to collaboration and partnership in different projects. We've got multiple different ventures running with different people at different stages of development. What I would say, one of our big needs at the moment is capital investment. We're looking at both investment into a group level, and then also partners for investment into various different specific projects around scale production facilities and infrastructure. So if there's anyone interested in conversations around that, certainly would be keen to engage, and I can go into a lot more detail. And I think other than that, I think if there's anything that people felt we might be able to assist them with, very keen to offer that assistance and information. So feel free to reach out, and hope everyone carries on supporting all the great work you do at GHA, Mandi, and keep doing what you're doing. It's great.
Well, thanks. It's fun. There is one more question. Have you looked into the biological stem fractionalization as an alternative to mechanical decortication?
Yeah, it's something I haven't gone into an enormous amount of detail. I think it is something that would be viable for certain end uses. Again, you're into sort of the metrics of if you're going to be doing that in the fields, you need to have quite specific controlled environmental conditions. And certainly from a UK perspective, when we're harvesting hemp at the back end of the year, it often rains quite a lot, and that could obviously impact on it impacts on retting, but it also could impact on any sort of biological process. Then to take that to an internal sort of industrialized process at the scales that would need to go into the markets, I think would be interesting to look at. I don't know how it would stack up compared to mechanized processing. So again, I mean, if there was any interest there, Bill, happy to have a conversation offline and discuss it a little bit further and see if we think it's something that might be viable.
Awesome. Other question or other comment, it actually popped up earlier and I clicked it right off because we were in the middle of talking about something else, but Paul's down in Ecuador and is building a project from seed to shelter, building a house with 1 hectare of hemp. I love every time that I get into this, and especially sitting in this role, and I'm sure you too, Jamie, the amount of opportunity that's popping up in all of these other countries that really have a strong foothold on agriculture and opportunity for various different offtakes. I know Ecuador is huge for roses, and I didn't know that. And of course, flowers and buds. So it'll be interesting what happens there. And then, of course, figuring out the genetics. Any last words before we sign off? We're at an hour. I want to be respectful of your time. And then I also want to remind, after this in an hour, on our Global Hemp Association website, we're having the Ohio State FFA girls come in. And this year's topic was carbon farming. Last year's topic, the same group of girls studied hemp. And so it was interesting how they just kind of merged and became the same conversation. So they're going to get on and talk about what they've learned around the carbon and carbon trade and are looking for advice on their presentation before they go to nationals. And so I invite everybody to get onto our Global Hemp Association website and register to log in. It's just a Zoom link where they then take the recording, we make a video of it, and then they take our resources and really go to work over this next couple of weeks to finalize their presentation. But yeah, back to you. Last words before we sign off.
I suppose I never really answered the question in full. We are working with people around carbon credits and an app for farmers to do that. It's one of the more developed systems. It's operational. They've got farmers getting paid. So again, if people were interested to specifically around how they can look at collating carbon credits from their farming practices, again, feel free to reach out to me. My email again is jamie@unite.co.uk. And I'm happy to discuss that further as well.
I love it. Okay, we will definitely get on board. And again, if any of you have heard anything today that you like, that you want to share, please share. If we've benefited you at all at any time, we really appreciate your donations to either our Friends of Hemp or Global Hemp Association. And then, of course, becoming a member of Global Hemp Association, we continue to make connections, bring people like Jamie on. Our goal really is about helping you guys expedite this process in finding good people and vetted relationships to move your business along. And so don't hesitate to reach out to Kayla, Joanne, or I at any time. And then, of course, Jamie, if you need anything, same thing. I'd love to continue this conversation and touch base. And then offline, there's obviously a few things I'd love to continue and dive into deeper. But
yeah, absolutely.
Very much. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, everybody. And we'll see you next time.